Okay, so we're back. Okay, Ashley, I'd like to have a few questions with regards economic issues, seeing that it's in the news so much these days. Can you give us a bit of a background as to what your thoughts are with regards to these bailouts and the huge fund, 450 billion euros that has been put aside to bail out Ireland and Greece and most definitely Portugal and Spain in the very soon future?
Well, first of all, I'm saying that this theme about whether we should be part of the European Union or not. Britain, of course, is not a member of the Eurozone. So we have a slightly different view of what is going on, although we're obviously involved to the extent that Britain is being asked to make a contribution to this bailout fund. My own view, and I am very much a monetarist, my own view is that if you print money, and that is effectively what is being done, without it being matched by growth in the wealth, in the cumulative wealth of the country concerned, then what you are doing is diluting the value of that currency, and that will express itself very quickly in inflation. And I think there is little doubt, and I've been saying this ever since the crisis emerged, or started to emerge in 2008, I think the prospects of the euro surviving are becoming dimmer by the day. I think there is a real chance that we will see an explosion in inflation, and that will at the same time cause other problems, because if interest rates go up to try and control it, then unemployment will also rise and the economic situation will become acutely worse even than it now is. So they've got themselves into a terrible fix by creating this fund out of thin air. And my own personal view is that the euro will ultimately collapse. And I think, frankly, good riddance to it, and if it takes the EU with it, so much the better.
I have seen just very recently reports that the Irish Central Bank itself has been allowed to basically print money, euros, on its own behalf, as distinct from just borrowing euros that was printed by the European Central Bank. Now that seems astonishing on the face of it. And as I said, I only saw it in the last few days, and it's very hard to get any information on it. Do you know anything about that procedure? Or have you read about it?
As I understand it, each of the countries in the Eurozone has the power to print euro notes and coins.
Well, excuse me, not just print them, but actually generate them into existence like an independent central bank is allowed to do.
Out of thin air.
Yeah.
In other words, there's no wealth asset sitting behind them. Yeah, as I understand it, that is an extension. Well, we've got two things here. First of all, the mechanics, and the mechanics are that individual members of the Eurozone have the right, as I understand it, under control from the European Central Bank, to create those notes and coins. That's one thing. The point I'm making is that they are doing so on such a scale and without any regard to the total amount of wealth that they're supposed to represent. And in effect, it's like putting water into a mixture, and the effect of that is to dilute it. And that in money terms we call inflation, because each individual note or coin now buys that much less, because there are more of them available. Now, it's quite a difficult thing to grasp if you're not familiar with the way the money markets and fiscal policy works. But the simple truth is that what is going on is almost certain. First of all, to undermine the euro itself, but secondly, ultimately to bring about its collapse, because it will go the direction of the Deutschmark in the Weimar Republic back in the 1930s, where you got inflation totally out of control because there's no monetary discipline.
Well, I find when it comes to inflation that the regular people on the street do not understand inflation as if we say 5%. But if you crank it up to 25 or 30 or 50%, everybody can understand it quite simply. Everybody can see easily what's happening in Zimbabwe when it's hundreds of percent, but they cannot see the smaller, more gradual effects in Europe when it's only 4 or 5%. But the figure that was given. Sorry, the figure that was given with the Irish situation here is that the Irish Central Bank was allowed to print up 25% of its gross domestic product, which is a very big sum. But
you're talking about 50 billion euros, aren't you?
Yes, we're talking about a lot of money here. But when it's divided up into over the entire eurozone, it's not altogether that much. But the problem is, or the solution is, maybe a better way to describe it is, when the German people see this inflation and when it is brought to their attention that smaller countries like Ireland are actually printing up and diluting the money, as you say, surely there'll be a backlash against it once it's brought to their attention, of course.
Yeah, but that may be too late. I think there are some economists who already take the view that it's too late. Because the situation is technically, well, not technically, it is practically out of control. They put huge amounts of money into Greece. They put huge amounts of new money into Ireland. If Spain, Portugal, Italy, or any combination of them were to go in the same direction, the sheer quantity of funding that would be required, again, essentially out of thin air, because those economies are not going to be growing by the same speed with which the money is being pumped in, the effects are going to be potentially catastrophic. And that's why they're so frightened of the consequences, and why there's an awful lot of talk going on about new schemes and new regulations. And of course, from a financial point of view inside the European Union, the bureaucrats see this as a beneficial crisis. They see it as an opportunity to persuade governments, including the British government, if they can, that there is a requirement now for more control over the economies of the member states. And that is something which is very alarming, because the end of that path, if we were to go down it, is that we lose control of our individual economies altogether. We lose control of our tax policy, we lose control of our finances. We in effect become a region of this European superstate, which was the objective all along.
So everything is going according to their plan?
Well, it's in that respect, it is another beneficial crisis that is being turned to their ultimate objective, yes.
Now, I also had another listener asking about the European Global Fund. Can you give us a bit of background upon that, please?
I wondered where we might get to that. Are you familiar with the question I asked in the Parliament in 2005? Because I think that says most of it, and it's only a minute. Let me read you what I asked. This was me in the European Parliament in 2005. I wish to draw your attention to the Global Security Fund, which was set up in the early 1990s under the auspices of Jacob Rothschild. This is a Brussels-based fund, and it is no ordinary fund. It does not trade, it is not listed, and it has a totally different purpose. It is being used for geopolitical engineering purposes, apparently under the guidance of the intelligence services. I have previously asked about the alleged involvement of the European Union's own intelligence resources in the management of slush funds and in the use of offshore accounts, and I still await a reply. To that question I now add another. What are the European Union's connections with the Global Security Fund, and what relationship does it have with the European Union institutions? Now, that was about 60 seconds worth of my time in the Parliament, which is all I was allowed mostly. Each time I spoke, I got a minute if I was lucky. And it was 6 years ago now, but that speech is all over the internet to this day. It's on YouTube. It's on dozens of other websites, political websites. And the fact of the matter is that that question has never been answered. Never.
So can you give us an indication on the size of this fund, and might it be used to just, we'll say, have the shapers of the media in their employ?
Well, you may remember in 1912, one of the earlier Rothschild dynasty, addressing a group of international bankers, said, "Give me control of credit for a nation, and I will not care who makes the laws there." In other words, the money men are the rulers. And if you come further forward in time to the British Fabian Society during the 30s, there was a great deal of there was a very close connection between some of the more intellectual Fabian socialists of the day and the banking dynasties in the City of London. I mean, you might think that's a bit of a contradiction, and with hindsight it probably was, but at the time there were a significant number of Fabian-type intellectual socialists who thought the takeover of the world and the introduction of a new international organization was going to solve all their problems. And it was driven essentially by a belief that ultimately there should be a new world order. Now, these phrases are familiar to us today, but that's where it all comes from. And if I tell you, for example, that in September 2002, so we're not talking about very long ago, on the lawn of the home of the Rothschild family in Buckinghamshire, a helicopter landed with Warren Buffett, who was then the second richest man in the world, we were told, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was a candidate for the governorship of California at the time, James Wolfenson, who was president of the World Bank, and Nicky Oppenheimer, who was the chairman of De Beers, and they were all at a meeting hosted by Jacob Rothschild. And according to an analysis by a good friend of mine, the one I mentioned earlier, who sadly died last year, Christopher Story, what happened at that meeting was that they privately and amongst themselves essentially established a $300 trillion transatlantic cartel fund to be used for political engineering over the future. And I suspect that part of that money found